There was an iron seat, like the one he himself was occupying, a little below the boys and a little above the women, and it was towards this seat that she was evidently advancing. She was well dressed, and she was using her umbrella as a stick to lean upon, and as he followed her with his eyes, stumbling and exhausted, moving up the slope of the hill, he decided that he knew who she was, and that she was none other than Miss Crow. Miss Crow indeed it was, and a Miss Crow on the verge of a fainting fit from her bad heart. There were several people passing both ways, both to the north and to the south, along the gravel path below the place where the lady with the umbrella was tottering. But it was a group of complete strangers to her as well as to him, for they were visitors at Glastonbury from the northeast of Germany, who, when she fell, as he saw her do now, rushed up to the slope to her aid. There certainly was a peculiar atmosphere effect abroad this February day. A soft light mist, filmy and gossamery, as a wet sea vapor, hung over the town, while the sun, shining between the heavy banks of clouds, touched with a curious opalescence, purely and tender, the portion of the hill upon which he was now seated. The boys ceased at once playing their game when they observed the disturbance made by the lady's fall, and calling to each other in shrill, excited cries, scrambled down the slope and huddled, as children will, pushing, whispering, jostling, to get the clearest view between the burly figures of the Germans. These latter were now talking in vociferous and guttural tones across the body of the prostrate woman. One of them was actually on his knees beside her, loosening the throat of her dress and trying to pull off her gloves. When Mr. Evans joined the group, as he was accepted at once as a native of the place, and everyone appealed to him as an authority upon what ought to be done with the lady of distinction and refinement who apparently had had a fit. He was aghast at the spectacle of the poor lady's face as he bent over it. In unqualified concern and pity, he surveyed the unnatural redness of her skin, the drops of white froth issuing from her open mouth, and the family twitch palpitating still, though she was quite unconscious, in her flaccid cheeks. She had been acting recklessly and unwisely all that day after her morning visit to the doctor. She had stopped at Wallop's longer than she should. She had kept her appointment to lunch at the Pilgrims's with Rachel and Atling, and as soon as she could escape from these young people, she had made her way, slowly but obstinately, to Whirl Hill, being seized with a passionate desire to rest upon that particular iron seat where, 30 years before, she was accustomed to meet Matt Decker. As Mr. Evans now surveyed her unconscious form, he found that he was not so devoid of natural philosophy as not to be grimly aware of the irony of the fact that he, the insane pervert, was now contemplating with lively concern the blow which heart trouble, that gentlest of all wielders of iron bars, had brought down on this warm mass of corpulent femininity. It was clear that the players at Rounders, as they inserted their small, perspiring bodies between the anxious foreigners, thought that Miss Crow was dead. And the words, "She has it got, my God, and death, her has taken God in heaven," in the thick indentation of the great mid-European plain, showed that the foreigners labored under the same delusion. "The woman something to say wishes," cried the man suddenly, who was bending over her on his knees. "To fetch her doctor had better vor," replied another, and a third, an extremely sturdy little man, planting upon his heels so firmly as if nothing could ever bowl him out, uttered the expressive, the impenetrable, the massively untidying word, consonant to all occasions, reassuring under all invasions of disorder, the word "Police!" How fast the mind works and how self-centered the human ego is. Even as he came forward and knelt down by Miss Crow's side, even as he lowered his ears to Miss Crow's murmuring lips, the Welshman was thinking to himself, Who's to know, if Codfin doesn't speak when they arrest him, that I wasn't in the tower by chance? No, 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 no. I shall never, in all my life, have another chance of seeing, of drinking up with my very eyes what I've been telling my pillow about night after night since I first knew what I was. She was murmuring intelligible words now. She was taking Mr. Evans for something else, for someone else, for a different tall, bony man. But as he listened to her and smelt upon her grey hair, from which the hat had been torn, a faint scent of eau de cologne, he remembered how more than once he had dressed up that pillow of his in his own vest and shirt, and had pounded it with the poker from the fender, while an orgasm of terrible ecstasy dissolved his very soul. I can't let this chance go, no! Not if I'm hanged for it, I can't! I can't! But nothing seemed able to keep away from him, as he heard the sturdy little man whose feet were so firm in the grass and so wide apart repeat the word police, a thin ice-cold bodkin point of ice-cold terror. The police, the police, the police, the police. This is a crime I'm going up there to see, different from any secret vice, however shameful. This is a crime, the worst of crimes. And when I've had that ecstasy, to the end of my days all will be exposed. Owen Evans the pervert. Owen Evans the malefactor. Owen Evans the murderer. They'll have me in Madame Tussaud's molded in wax. My nose, that everyone laughs at so, in wax. Have you been down to the Chamber of Horrors yet and seen Owen Evans? Anyone would know from his face what he was, the human carnivore. Meanwhile, from the contorted mouth of the unconscious woman, whose eyelids kept flickering but did not open, the breathing grew louder and less human, and between the great animal gasps, like the flapping of a bellows, broken, incoherent words forced out their way. The German upon his knees by her side seemed to be dimly acquainted with the sort of attack she was suffering from, for he lifted up her head and began pouring down her throat something from a small flask that he had produced. But instead of recovering her from her fit, this treatment only had the effect of stopping her attempts at speech, and at throwing her back again into complete immobility. I'd like to pause now and thank our sponsor. Today's sponsor of Glastonbury Romance is Roddeston Airport Hotel, Providence. Roddeston, a Johnson & Wales University education facility. For a moment, Mr. Evans thought she was really dead now. Yeah. But the German, with his hand on her heart, muttered emphatically, "Life she still has, the poor woman. Life she still has. Has anybody sent for the police?" Mr. Evans whispered to the German with the flask. He meant to say, "For the doctor." The kneeling man rose to his feet now, shrugged his shoulders, and addressed some question to his companions. It appeared from what they said that nobody had gone for anybody. The soul of the obsessed Welshman now made a hurried rush down the corridors of his consciousness, closing the door to the iron bar chamber down there and opening more normal vestibules of awareness. "I go get doctor," he announced, surveying the simple guardians of the unconscious lady. Thus speaking, he raised his bowler hat with a grandiose gesture, both to the women on the ground and to the strangers around her, and made off at a great pace down the gravel path that led to the town. In the confusion of his wits, however, it was not to Dr. Feld's house, but to his own house that he directed his way. Secret urge within him driving him now, as in all practical crisis, to go at once to Cordelia. But if a beneficent chance moved him to this self-preservative action, a malefic chance willed it that to this chance willed it that when at last, panting and breathless, he entered his little house in Old Wells Road, he found Cordelia deep in conversation in her parlor with her mother, Mrs. Gurd. Mrs. Gurd had been confiding to Cordelia her growing worry about the girl's father, how he persisted in spending the bulk of his time over at Chalice Hill, and how he had been several times of late upon some mysterious errands of the Glastonbury Bank. "'Tisn't that he be changed, Cordy, understand. 'Tis that he be more his own self than I've ever known him. Crum sees it too. 'Tis as if this commune's silliness has wrought on him to let himself go. He talks more about the blood and the master and the water of life than I've ever known him. He talks every night, Cordy, on and on, after us have put out the gas. I wish he would tell me what he goes to the bank for. Mr. Trent brings him his pay for being mayor regular enough. There's no reason why he should go to the bank. I don't like, nor I never have liked, the young man Robert Stilley. What do you think he goes to the bank for, Cordy?" If Mr. Evans had caught a glimpse of Mrs. Gurd through the window, he would have shut off again. But fortunately, the two women were seated out of sight on the window, so that it wasn't until he opened the parlor door that he knew she was there. Cordelia recognized at once that something was very wrong with him, for he stood in the doorway muttering about Dr. Fell, Bob Shepherd, Germans, Rounders, Miss Elizabeth Crowe fainting on Rural Hill, and his having an appointment at sunset that night, a very important appointment at sunset, with Father Paleolog, at sunset, about some icons. The mother and daughter were both of them on their feet, looking at him with an uneasy stare, Cordy with a passionate and frightened stare, Mrs. Gurr with a worried and anxious stare. "I hope he has not been going to the bank," the latter thought to herself. And in her heart she began wondering whether icons were some species of familiar spirits, like her own Pembrokeshire fairies, that this Mr. Paleolog claimed he could conjure up. "I only came in to tell you, Cordelia," said Mr. Evans now, in a clearer, more intelligent manner, "that I've got to send Dr. Fell to Rural Hill, where Miss Crowe lies unconscious. After I've seen there, I've got this engagement at sunset. Did I say sunset? Yes, at sunset. I hope you are feeling very well, Cousin Megan." At this actual moment, towards this man in a disordered state of mind, an iron bar tapping on the inside door of his locked-up intention, and towards two women staring at this man in bewildered uneasiness, the First Cause poured forth its double magnetic streams of white and black vibrations. Out of nothing, out of pre-existing vortices of energy that themselves issued from nothing by the creative will of the being, Mr. Evans, his wife, and his wife's mother had been created. In them the First Cause reproduced itself, the macronism of these three microcosms, the macrocosm of these three microcosms. And like the First Cause, these three persons, Mr. Evans standing in the doorway, Cordelia standing by her husband's writing desk, and Mrs. Gurd standing by the purple chair, had the power of giving themselves up to the good in their nature, or to the evil. For Mr. Evans could at that very moment, even as he gazed at the picture of the river, the women in the boat, which he associated with the word expulsumor, have transformed himself into a saint as devoted, as spiritual, as tenderly considerate as Sam Decker, who in his normal state was a good deal less like a saint than Mr. Evans was. This he might have done, even as he stood there after telling these plain-faced women, while the mother-of-pearl sunlight flickered into the room, those lies about Father Paleolog, and in doing so have rendered himself morally superior to the First Cause, if it had not been that from the word expulsumior his mind reverted to Merlin's early life, and to that incident of the horn and the stag. So goodbye, Cordy. So goodbye, Cousin Megan. I must get hold of Dr. Fell, and I must see Father Paleolog. Well, a lot of stuff going on there. Till next time, goodbye from Glastonbury. Cheers.